Hello there, thank you for joining us. My name is Dave Patrick. I'm part of the cybersecurity team here at Fujitsu. You're joining us today for our webinar, which is called Illuminating Shadow IT to Accelerate Growth. I'm delighted today to be joined by Dave Barnett, who is the head of the Edge Protection Portfolio at Forcepoint. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Dave. It's great to be here, and hey, Andy, as well. It's great to be doing this presentation alongside you. I've been involved in CASB for the last 4 years, and trust me, I've seen and made enough mistakes to have learned from them. So, looking forward to talking a little bit about how we could use Shadow IT to be a source of innovation rather than just a annoying thing to have to stop.
Thanks, Dave. And of course, as you say, joined also by Andy Baines, who is our chief architect here at Fujitsu in the UK for our security business. Andy, hello.
Hi, Dave. So I have responsibility for Fujitsu's data protection portfolio, which encompasses our CASB, consultancy and managed service offerings.
So as I say, it's a pleasure to have you both here with me as we look at this topic of Shadow IT and the security risks that I think Shadow IT poses. I have to confess, it's been quite enlightening talking with you both as we've prepared for this session, because I've always assumed that Shadow IT is a problem for the IT department and the security department and teams. The conversation I've heard a lot in our world over the last few years is that this is a constant battle between the lines of business, IT and security teams, who all appear to be trying to do the right thing for their own world, their own silo, but typically they end up causing a problem for each other. But as we'll touch on a bit later, if this issue is handled properly in a spirit of openness, it's actually a way that the business, the IT teams and security teams can work together to help drive an organization on through their digital transformation. Now, of course, Shadow IT has become even more topical since the start of 2020, making this conversation today even more critical. So Andy, turning to you, could you give us a view on why there's a need to address the Shadow IT issue and why it's become more important recently and the challenges that it presents?
Yeah, sure, Dave. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that adaptive working and remote working in particular is here to stay. I think it's been forced onto a lot of our users because of what's going on today with COVID, etc. People have had to start to work from home, but there's lots of indicators to say that now organisations have been through this process of getting a lot of the workforce to be based at home or remote locations. They're considering it as the new normal and the way that they're going to operate in the future. So there's information around which tells us that organisations are actively looking to recruit people who are prepared to work remotely. There's research around that suggests significant savings can be made if organisations switch to adaptive workforces. So there's lots of indicators there that say this is the way organisations are going to operate in the future, irrespective, I guess, of COVID. It's just going to be the way that the workforce operates in the future. But I guess as a result of this new way of working, the adaptive workforce, there's a number of new challenges that organisations need to be conscious of. A key thing, obviously at the forefront of all organisations' minds, is that with the remote workforce, productivity can't be compromised. So they need to make sure that users can access all the systems that they need to access in a secure way, even though they're working outside the traditional enterprise boundaries. Also, the use of different devices by end users now. It's no longer the case that the user will either use a desktop or a laptop to access corporate systems. They may now use smartphones, tablets, etc., etc. So this proliferation of devices also needs to be managed in a secure way to protect the organization and the users themselves. And the traditional boundaries that existed, corporate boundaries, organizational boundaries, are no longer as clear as they used to be. So the traditional models of using boundary control devices like firewalls, proxies, etc., needs to be rethought based on the fact that the workforce is now no longer within those corporate boundaries. So the defensible perimeter has traditional one has gone and now is actually moving with the user. So we need to protect the boundaries around our user population as they operate from the different locations. And because of this flexibility and agility that adaptive working gives us, the reverse side of the coin is that this introduces challenges around securing the behavior of our users. So making sure that they adhere to corporate policies and standards, that they use approved applications, that they store organizational data in secure ways. And this remote workforce and introduces a whole new set of challenges around ensuring that users behave and operate in a secure way. And this brings us on to a term that hopefully most people are familiar with today, and that is the use of shadow IT. Shadow IT can cover two main areas. One is the use of cloud applications, potentially unsanctioned applications from an organizational perspective. And the other is the storage of organizations' data in the cloud, potentially in an unsecure way. So shadow IT, whilst it supports flexible and agile working, introduces a whole new remit of things that organizations need to be conscious of and potentially control. So the kind of things that we're talking about is sharing corporate data in a cloud service, but sharing it in an insecure manner. So instead of restricting the access to that data, potentially it's just got an open share that anybody can access. And that data may be confidential or sensitive to that particular organization and shouldn't really be shared in that way. But that is an area that needs to be identified and controlled. There's also the issue of what were potentially restricted websites for whatever reason, breaching corporate policies or whatever it may be. Proxy controls can potentially be bypassed if remote working is in place, and therefore the traditional controls that were in place to protect the user and protect the organization from accessing websites that may be malicious or damaging in some way, that can be opened up, and it's another channel for an organization's information and systems to potentially be compromised. And the final one is the use of cloud applications, as I mentioned earlier, which are potentially unsanctioned by the organization that the user is working for. And the reason for that, those applications should be sanctioned, is they may be risky. So they may not authenticate the user correctly, they may not protect the data sufficiently that the user is using within a particular application. So these three areas are areas which introduce additional challenges because of the shadow IT issue. Next slide. So the kind of business risks that shadow IT presents to us fall into a number of areas. First of all, a lack of visibility. So within traditional IT systems, most people have got a good view of who's supposed to access what and to what level. With shadow IT, we don't have the same level of control, and we certainly don't have the same level of visibility. So this means that users can potentially sign up for a cloud service. The organization that they work for doesn't know anything about it, and that user then starts to transmit potentially sensitive data into that cloud service, to store it there with no real understanding of what the impact on the business or themselves is in doing that. So there's the issue of the loss of control caused by a lessening of visibility for the enterprises that have their users accessing these particular systems. Another enormous area for organizations is compliance management. So many organizations must comply with certain standards and regulations. And because of the loss of visibility and the loss of control, it opens up the possibility for organizations to breach the compliance and legislation that they should adhere to, which has all sorts of knock-on implications in terms of financial impact, loss of credibility of the organization, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, the cost inefficiencies. Many of these are caused by the lack of visibility. The organization doesn't know what cloud services are being used, but the additional impact that can occur to an organization is when there's some sort of breach, either a data leakage or a user's credentials are compromised, and the cost of addressing those breaches can be substantial.
Thanks, Andy. That's been really, really helpful. Clearly, shadow IT can cause problems, and it's more than just mischievous business lines, isn't it? Those that are trying to circumvent processes. And the impact, of course, as you've just described to us, can be quite serious. But turning to Dave now. Dave, I have a confession for you. I am not actually a security professional. I've spent my entire career in marketing for various companies, and I've seen firsthand where shadow IT has genuinely accelerated processes and given a capability to teams that they just didn't have before, capabilities that have proven invaluable. So with that hat on, the answer here for me just cannot be that we lock down everything from a security point of view, just because it's not a trusted IT system. Now, when we've been talking, you've spoken to me about how this tension between the business and IT and security can actually be made into something productive. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. No problem at all, Dave. I mean, IT departments have increasingly over the last decade been talking to the business, and we see, typically discussions being had over known knowns, things that IT is providing the users with to do their jobs, the tools that they're providing to do their jobs. And typically those tools have been on-premise, but they're increasingly in the cloud. But it's all a matter of perception, right? So digital transformation to an IT department tends to be the stuff that they provide. Digital transformation to yourself might be the thing that you've provided to solve a problem. And telling IT or telling security is something that hasn't been on your priority list. Your priority has been to share that file, collaborate, or just do your job better. And whenever I talk to customers, I tend to ask them a question that they're not expecting, and the question is, how much of your business's digital transformation is generated by the users, and how much is provided by your company? And that is shadow IT, right? So if people are solving problems that IT is not providing tools for, that's shadow IT. And the right answer is, for the security team, is not necessarily to block that. And it's really important that IT departments and businesses collaborate. In fact, ever so more important now with the pace of material change that's come about as a result of the situation we're in, where adaptive working is a reality. So the answer I tend to get is around about 25%. And it tends to be stuff that IT departments know about. So what we can do with Forcepoint and Fujitsu is identify what the extent of shadow IT is, not with the intention of necessarily playing whack-a-mole with every risky cloud application, but maybe having a dialogue with the business and identifying whether or not that cloud application is providing value to the business. And then what we can do, because of the maturity of the technology, we're able now to lower the risk of shadow IT, and to a point where it could be acceptable, maybe to use, or maybe it could be adopted by the business. And that is really transformative. Listening to your users in a very controlled way, and being able to accelerate the pace of user-generated digital transformation. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the process. So the technology that exists within Forcepoint gateways and other gateway network appliances, and has done for a long time, allows people to allow cloud applications to be used, and that's typically things like Office 365, or web pages that are safe, typically things like Google, but block stuff that they deem to be too risky. And quite often, what falls into the risky area tends to be stuff that's out of control. So you've seen somebody using Dropbox. It's not a corporate standard. You've seen a lot of files going up there. You're going to block it because that's the only control you've got, is allow it or block it. Or in some cases, you can handle that by exception. And we see that quite a lot, where you wag your finger at your users and say, why are you using Dropbox? And the user says, well, actually, I need to collaborate. The only people I'm going to collaborate with is this third party. It's trusted, and I'm only going to pass up files that are not sensitive. And then you ask your users to sign a waiver or to agree with their manager that you can use it for a period of time. and you just trust them. You leave it down to trust. And quite often that, whilst it solves a problem, it's really a sticking plaster. So what we can do, and what we would encourage people to consider doing, is harvesting the knowledge of what cloud applications people are using via the Shadow IT logs, and they're free of charge within all of our gateway appliances and next generation firewalls. And then work with Fujitsu to understand, is it useful? So IT the security team could identify the logs. They can work in conjunction with the business to understand, well, there's a lot of files that have gone up to Dropbox. Why was it? Was it personal, or was it something that's of business importance? And have an honest and frank discussion with the business. Not that you're going to block it, but that you want to actually tolerate it, or you want to adopt it. And if the business says, well, it's kind of important to us, we're doing an acquisition, or we're doing some work with a third party or a lawyer or so on and so forth, and maybe or not, there's an alternative that would be company sanctioned, that would be a better choice. And maybe if the answer is no, and Dropbox needs to be used, then check with finance, legal and privacy around GDPR. What controls do you need to put into place for this to be used? And then the tools can be used to tolerate it. And say, well, actually, we're going to trust you, but we're actually going to control that trust. So you can use Dropbox for 2 weeks to do this project that you're doing. But if you try to upload any sensitive data as defined by a DLP system, or you start to do stuff that could be risky, we will allow you to, for example, upload sensitive data but not to share it, then that's going to be automatically blocked. Or the fourth way could be that Dropbox use could be of value to other people. And we see this an awful lot in marketing. So let's just take this in steps. We need to talk about toleration, and this gives an indication of what Fujitsu would do to help you when they've seen that somebody has used a cloud application to share data, and they found that in the log files. And then we can take it through the cloud governance board, talking to the business and talking to finance, legal and privacy, and so on and so forth, and say, well, actually, there's lots of use here for this to happen. There's business purpose for this. So blocking it is going to hamper the business. It's not going to be a good thing. And typically when you block access to important cloud applications, one or two things happens. And number one is somebody more senior than you says, turn that block off immediately. Or the second thing is they start using a different way of doing it. They start using a different file sharing system. So if it's important to the business, then allowing it could be the answer. But if there's a data risk, then what we can do is at the gateway or from the managed endpoints, we can transparently proxy the traffic without affecting the user experience at all. We can allow good traffic to happen. In the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about a customer example of where exactly this happened. We went to an oil and gas organization recently, and we were just talking about Shadow IT. We're looking at their security, Forcepoint Security Manager log files, the free Shadow IT reporting that's within there. And we saw that there was a rather large amount of WeTransfer traffic. And we looked at who was doing it. Because, I mean, this oil and gas organization, they were convinced that they had no external sharing and collaboration because for regulatory reasons that had to be the case. And we had a look at who was doing it, and it was the security administrator who happened to be in the room. So I kind of looked around and said, "Why did you do this?" And he said, "Well, we don't provide the tools to transfer 100 meg of file to anybody, and I need to upload a Microsoft file to one of our suppliers for them to check it out." And I'm like, well, if you're breaking the rules, is this, is it still possible for people to do this outside of IT? And he said, yeah, this policy covers everybody. We don't block any file transfer. I was like, well, this might not just be a small isolated problem. Within 5 days, we were able to technically demonstrate that we could move WeTransfer traffic through the CASB, through the data protection service in line without affecting the user experience whatsoever. 5 days. The art of the possible. We just, these are really simple and uncomplicated ways of dealing with some problems that could be quite big. So in that case, WeTransfer was important to him, and it was important to a few other people that we caught using it, but it wasn't something that had widespread value within the business. So on the next slide, I want to talk about how you could actually harvest that those log files, that innovation from the log files, to actually transform your business. So, you know, if you think about it, we're craftsmen, right? Craftswomen. You know, we do things like people did hundreds of years ago. We make beautiful things, right? We do great work. You know, people are absolutely amazing. They're the biggest value that we have. And for hundreds of years, craftsmen have been keeping their tools clean. You know, keep your saw sharp and your hammer is nice and clean. Why should it not be the same in IT? Our job is to keep our users' cloud tools clean. Looking at the same process, we see that somebody's using a cloud application. We're going to tolerate it if it's just tactical. If it's just Dave uploading a file to WeTransfer, which happens to be a large file, it just needs to do it quickly. We can control that. It's an exception. But maybe other people might notice what's going on. And increasingly, as we are adaptively working, I'm working in the kitchen, right? If my child comes in and says, "Dad, why are you using a slow way of transferring a file, or why are you tearing your hair out? Why don't you just use WeTransfer, or why don't you just use something that I found off the internet?" And sometimes they're actually good. Yeah, so sometimes if your procurement exercise, so to speak, is your son telling you, about a cool way of doing something, you just go and do it. It might be that there are unknown collaboration tools that people around us can find that could make a huge difference for the user. But you just can't allow unfettered access to stuff, right? You need to have controls, and those controls could be from the CASB, or could be from the data protection. But they might also, if you're looking to, adopt a cloud application more widespread within the business, you need to obviously buy it. You need to also fit it in with your identity strategy, and your support team need to be involved as well. And that's where Fujitsu and Forcepoint can really help, with that operational model of identifying shadow IT. If it's of enough importance to the business, then it can go widespread, and we can apply appropriate controls. And in the next slide, I want to talk to you about a customer who recently did exactly this. Following the situation we are in at the moment, where we happen to be having to work from home, a financial services organization in the UK came to Forcepoint and Fujitsu and said, "We actually are using Zoom amongst our executives. It's not a corporate standard, and we're not really supposed to do it, but we trust each other. We find that Zoom is actually quite useful to collaborate." And now we have a problem, because at the moment, the only people that are using it are senior executives that kind of trust each other, and that's I guess it's their decision. But what they said to us was, "Look, all of our employees now, all of our customer services representatives are working from home, so we need a way for them to be able to collaborate." The problem is they have access to personal financial data. The big risk here is that they're actually higher risk than we are. The people who are dealing with the general public, because within Zoom, of course, you can do lots of good stuff like sharing files and collaborating and stuff like that. So we want to actually use Zoom. We've been using it kind of as a shadow function, but we want to adopt that much more widespread. And what we did was we demonstrated how we could layer transparent controls. So Zoom goes through the CASB and the DLP, and data that's too sensitive gets stripped out. But also, it's authenticated properly by their two-factor system, their federated identity, so they know who's got access to Zoom. They've gone through a procurement exercise now. So that use of Zoom was totally 100% user generated. And I think we'll see more of that, maybe with collaboration, but also, certainly with file sharing and so on and so forth. So that was a great example of what is happening out there, and the way that we solved it, I think, was quite useful.
Thanks, Dave. What you've just described there seems like a much smarter process, those diagrams you showed, a much smarter process and way of doing things for organizations. In your opinion, does this open the door for a sensible compromise for businesses?
Well, a sensible compromise is one way of putting it, but I think it really goes a lot further than that. It opens up the opportunity really to have sensible discussions around how IT, the business, and other interested parties such as security and finance, legal, and privacy can really progress together. It really should not be a compromise between two parties. It should be a collaboration to achieve more digital transformation and to learn from the users about how that could be accomplished. I think that organizations, there's a lot of things that are changing right now, and organizations that are going to be successful are the big ones that can adapt rapidly to change. And I think this is probably a great way of doing it.
Very good point. Yeah, thanks. Thanks again, Dave. So a prime example here of how security is as much an enabler as it is a protective layer for the organization. And that's a much more positive and constructive way of looking at this, especially as shadow IT grows. But understanding that is one thing. Brings me to the next question though. How is it that each of our firms can help a customer accelerate that process, start finding that balance, have that risk and reward conversation? So, Andy, turning to you, what is it that Fujitsu can do to help customers with this?
Okay, thanks, Dave. So, working in conjunction with Forcepoint Technologies, Fujitsu's approach to CASB is consultancy-led. So it's all about understanding the customer's requirements and the data protection issues that they face. So our managed service has been developed around a number of areas based on the initial consultancy engagement to fully understand and agree the customer's requirements. So our managed service is focused on increasing the visibility that organizations have of the shadow IT assets that are in use within their particular organization and by what users. We can also provide a real clear view of the risk rating associated with each of the applications that are in use. So there's an algorithm that Forcepoint use, which basically allow us to say to the customer, these are the cloud applications that are in use, and these are the risk ratings, either good or bad, associated with each of those cloud applications. In addition to that, we can feed in the customer specific requirements. So if we want to tailor the risk rating based on customer specific requirements, we can also do that. And building on to that, we can then identify where corporate data is shared in the cloud in an insecure manner, so overexposed data. We can quickly identify that, and there's various things we can do immediately to address that, ranging from delete the overexposed file to change the file permissions to encrypt it. There's lots of things we can do once we've identified that. And all these things are moving towards helping the organization use cloud services in a more secure manner by protecting the data that's stored in the cloud, by ensuring that any compliance requirements they've got are met and they're not breaching those regulations that need to be met. And as an ongoing part of the service, we will monitor cloud usage and we will detect threats, or be those caused by the user or caused by breaches in an organization's policy, so that data is leaked where it shouldn't be, or credentials are leaked and therefore third parties who shouldn't have access to the systems actually manage to get onto those systems. So those are the kind of things that the Fujitsu service is all about. And finally, any issues that are identified, we work with our customers to help remediate those, to fine-tune policies, to make sure that the issue doesn't happen again. So I guess in summary, the Fujitsu CASB managed service is a 24/7 service, and it allows our customers to be more confident in the usage of cloud services through, as I mentioned earlier, through improved visibility and control, through the fact that we will continually monitor cloud usage and report and act on what we see. And it helps us move our customers from reactive security management, i.e. dealing with something after it's happened, to proactive control, where we actively stop things before the impact on the customer's business.
Thanks, Andy. So, Dave, turning back to you, we've just heard how organisations can accelerate their journey to illuminate shadow IT and help drive those productive conversations, and do it with Fujitsu as a managed service. Forcepoint is a pivotal part of how we deliver that for our customers. Could you give us a bit more detail around how Forcepoint, is a part of that, the role that you play in helping to protect organisations?
Yeah, certainly. No problem at all, Dave. Well, we need a blueprint, right? And on the next slide, we've got basically an overview of how this would work for you. So there's a technology involved here, and the technology would be either for our existing on-premise, web security customers. That would be the Forcepoint Security Manager and Forcepoint Web Security, either deployed on-premise or in a hybrid mode for remote roaming users. Or alternatively, some of our customers have been using cloud web security, and we've recently launched our cloud security gateway, which is a convergence of pure cloud web security, inline DLP, and sandboxing and that kind of thing, and CASB as well, of course. So depending on the technology choice, it doesn't actually matter really that much, but they all kind of do more or less the same thing. But there are three scenarios that I wanted to talk you through with regards to those technologies. So on the left, you can see inside the customer's environment, so a trusted environment, and you typically have users. Remember the good old days when people actually worked from a physical location, and those users would all of the traffic for those users. It makes sense to push those through a physical web proxy in some cases, and that would be managed by the FSM, the Forcepoint Security Manager. So if those users wanted to go to the internet, it's just what we normally do, right? The web traffic, they would just type in Google, and it would say Google's allowed, so you're going to go to Google. If those users wanted to go to the cloud application that's sanctioned, for example, by an organization, let's say OneDrive, that OneDrive traffic will be transparently proxied from the web proxy up to the CASB, and that would look at things that could be risky. Yeah, so personal OneDrive would be a risky thing to do from a workplace because you could exfiltrate data. Accidentally, sometimes people sync their work laptops with their personal OneDrive. And why should a customer, why should an end user care? As far as they're concerned, they've got access to it. They can do what they want. They've typed in their username and password. They'll just share happy. So the CASB can provide guardrails to protect against things that of a risky user behavior. We can also interrogate the data. So inline interrogation of the data without reducing any user experience. So if your company says you can put anything you like into company OneDrive, but company OneDrive is not PCI compliant and we're a retailer, so don't put any credit card data in there, we can filter out that before it even touches OneDrive and just block it out. Then you have managed users who are roaming. And in this case, with the adaptive working that's going on at the moment, that's increasingly happening more. And the jury's out whether we're going back to offices if we don't need to. Those managed users on the managed endpoint might decide that they want to go to company sanctioned Zoom. And that would then, the traffic from that company sanctioned Zoom would go through our cloud security gateway, wherever closest they are geographically, because we have 160 locations around the world. And that traffic would, we could then make decisions. If the policy says no credit card data transferred over company sanctioned Zoom, then we can filter out that from the files in Zoom. And I'm using Zoom as an example because we're kind of broadcasting this on Zoom, but it could be any cloud application whatsoever. If your company is allowing it to happen, we can inline reduce the risk of behavior and data. But the users, the managed users outside of the organization might have discovered WeTransfer. And those WeTransfer is not a company sanctioned application, let's say. So the cloud security gateway, which of course has the Shadow IT logs, would spot that somebody's trying to access WeTransfer, or maybe has accessed WeTransfer. And then we could take it through the governance process and say, is WeTransfer important to the business? If so, how can we lower the risk of it? And then maybe we could tolerate the use for a while. So that's the scenario, but that's from a device. And the traffic is transferred via Forcepoint One endpoint, which is a small piece of software that runs microservices on the endpoint. There is another scenario. The other scenario is that people unmanaged, who are not on managed devices, are trying to access company-sanctioned cloud applications. And the dirty secrets, if you like, in cloud is that unless you have onerous restrictions on where you can access a cloud application from, conditional access, for example, if you don't have that in place, then anybody can access a cloud application if they have the credentials, even if you've got two-factor authentication enabled. So to manage that access from an unmanaged device, you need to use a reverse proxy. So let's say somebody accesses OneDrive, company OneDrive, from an unmanaged device. It's not being enrolled in Cloud Security Gateway. CASB has recognized that attempting to access company, via the reverse proxy, company OneDrive. And then you could set policies and say, well, if people are trying to access company OneDrive from an unmanaged device, we clearly haven't got any control over that device, so data cannot be downloaded to it that's sensitive in nature. But we might want to, from a productivity standpoint, block OneDrive downloading, but maybe we could tolerate the risk of OneDrive viewing of files in the web browser. Or perhaps, OneDrive and Teams are very close. Maybe we could access some form of chat within Teams, but we're not going to allow downloading of files from any company-sanctioned application. And the granularity is insane. I mean, with inline controls, we have, I think, over 800 things that we can control in Office 365 and well over 2,000 in things like AWS. So, allowing that control over the bring your own device, so unmanaged device users. And really, I don't want to suggest that this is overcomplicated. It's not. It's very simple. That what we can do is very well documented. And, Fujitsu and Forcepoint are very well versed in delivering solutions. Where it starts, though, is where is your risk? Where do you perceive the highest level of risk? And, all that flows down into the controls that we can place.
Thanks, Dave. So here's a question for you both. From what we've seen here, there's a solution that can help organizations handle these demands of shadow IT and stay secure in doing so. But before we declare victory between ourselves, is there anything organizations can't do or need to think about in terms of this approach, need to be aware of? Or have we actually genuinely got a silver bullet here? Maybe Dave, back to you. What's your view on that?
I tend to stay away from things like silver bullets because it really flows down from what the risk that the business perceives is. And if you look at the capabilities of the technology, right, itself, we can fundamentally do two things. Number one is we can lower the risk of data. We can do a whole load of things around data that could mean that you could, use data more widely, whereas before you might, for regulatory reasons or security reasons, you couldn't. The second thing we can do is control the behavior of the users in the cloud applications that they, or the websites they're going to. So if you combine those two things, which are quite nebulous, you can boil them down into a number of risk areas. So oversharing of data is one. The uncontrolled use of shadow IT is another. And then there's things like administrators doing stuff that they shouldn't do, bring their own device, and so on and so forth. And below those are very well documented use cases. And those use cases, I like to think about them as the guardrails in a bowling alley. If you're like me, if you go bowling, I'm a 60-pointer. It goes to the duster as often as it goes down the middle. In fact, if it goes down the middle, I don't care how many pins it hits. I'm high-fiving people. With one pin, that can be quite embarrassing. But if you bring a child with you, you get to put the guardrails up, and all of a sudden you're the big Lebowski, and you're doing 120s, knocking away the strikes. Now, if you think about the use cases that are very simple and very well uncomplicated and well documented, we're going to knock and if the user is the ball, we're going to knock them back inside if they do something that's too risky. So user tries to share data externally via a sanctioned cloud application, knock him back in. User is given access to or tolerated access to WeTransfer, but tries to share credit card data, knock it back in again. User in the development team using GitHub, which it was not sanctioned but is becoming adopted, tries to upload I don't know, intellectual property or state company secrets into GitHub repository, knock it back in again. Don't allow it to happen. You know, Azure administrator accesses Azure from 3 places in the space of 5 minutes, which indicates a compromised credentials. Just knock it back in. Don't allow it to happen. These are really simple, well-documented guardrails. So it's not a silver bullet, but it can achieve the stated goal, which is driving adoption of cloud applications that you need. We want you to use more cloud by overcoming the data and the behavior risk of using cloud. Sorry, it's a bit of a long answer.
No, absolutely fine. That's really good insight. Thanks again, Dave. Andy, same question to you. In your view, is this? I think the answer is going to be no. But you know, why would it not be a silver bullet, for example?
Okay, thanks, Dave. Well, yeah, there's quite a lot covered in the previous response. So, I guess from my perspective, CASB isn't a silver bullet to secure cloud usage, although it's a key component in increasing organisations' confidence of cloud use of cloud services. I think the thing we need to be conscious of is this is more than a technology issue. So it's really important in order to gain maximum benefit from CASB that the organisation implementing CASB has a clear view of what it is they want to achieve. And what I mean by that is, are the data classifications understood? Are the levels of protection associated with each classification defined? Because without that start point, it can be very difficult to tune a CASB service so it specifically benefits the customer. So for me, the technology is absolutely fundamental. However, the way it's deployed needs to be supported by a clear view of what the organisation is trying to achieve, what data needs to be protected and in what way. And additionally, we need to think about the other things outside of the box a little bit, I guess, and that's around, you know, license charges. So if customers are going off, if users are going off signing up for shadow IT services, and the enterprise isn't really aware of that, you know, there can be hidden license costs that aren't generally, you know, obvious to the company, and so getting those under control and controlling spend is another key area. And I guess we need to view the outcome that we're trying to achieve here, and what we're trying to get to is secure use of cloud applications within an organisation. And again, CASB will support that, but it's not the only thing that needs to happen. So having a well-configured CASB system that's driven by business requirements and business risk is a great way to improve secure usage of cloud services within an organisation.
Great, thanks, Andy. As we draw our session to a close, there's one thing we've not really discussed. This approach itself makes a lot of sense, but I would imagine it's not just something you can do tomorrow. We've already touched on the fact that it's a journey where you have to, as Dave was saying earlier, you have to learn to walk, but where do you even begin to take those first few steps? Andy, where would you suggest that customers start?
Okay, thanks, Dave. So a great way to start with CASB is to run on a proof of value. So actually use the technology in a way that enables customers to quickly see the benefits that they can obtain through the use of CASB. And the way Fujitsu do that using Forcepoint technology is to run what we call a shadow IT assessment. So it's minimal impact on the customer's organisation and can provide massive amounts of value very quickly. So the shadow IT assessment is all about taking a snapshot in time, looking at shadow IT usage within the customer's organisation, that's application usage and data storage, and presenting that back to the customer and basically saying, okay, using your information, this is what we've uncovered. We've uncovered the type of applications that are in use, the risk rating for each of those applications. We can also uncover cloud organizational data that's stored in the cloud and the risks associated with that. So very quickly, by using a shadow IT assessment, we can report back to the customer and show them, increase their visibility of shadow IT usage and the risks that are present right now in the use of those systems by their end users. And you know, there are lots of risk factors that we can uncover. You can see some examples on the slide here, but these are the kind of things we can very quickly extract as a result of the Shadow IT assessment, and the customer can then make a decision based on an understanding and a visibility of what's going on within their organization right now through the use of the Shadow IT assessment. Okay, next slide. So what the Shadow IT assessment gives us is lots of data, so we need to do something with that. So these are the stages that the Fujitsu managed service around CASB covers. So the identification and detection piece we've sort of talked about in the IT assessment service, and that will be incorporated into the overall managed service. So the continued increased visibility of what's going on within the customer's cloud environment is part of the managed service. So identify and detect carries on. Once we've got that information, we need to do something with it. So we can then introduce protect and respond type activities. So when we see things going on which breach policy or are insecure, we can take immediate action. And as has been covered in earlier sections of the presentation, CASB has got a number of ways in which it can enforce protection mechanisms straight away. So we can intercept data in transit, so we can stop things actually getting to the cloud service. If we find things within the cloud service that shouldn't be there, there's a number of actions we can take to protect the data within the cloud environment that it resides. So protection helps us do something about policy violations. We can then say, okay, when we've spotted a violation, why did this happen? What was the response that we put in place? And how do we recover from that? And that respond and recover piece is then how we add extra value to the CASB service by fine-tuning it based on what we see in terms of day-to-day cloud usage from our customers. And as we see things which are in breach of policy or which are risky, we can tune the configuration of the CASB service to make sure those things don't happen again. So it's an ongoing process, the identification, detection, protection, response, recovery is an ongoing set of activities which are encompassed within Fujitsu's managed CASB service.
So running this assessment is really the starting point for the journey we've been talking about. And from that, we can make informed recommendations to help a customer on the journey. Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure. And it's certainly put the conundrum of using Shadow IT securely in a new light for me. And I hope it's done the same for everybody listening. If you'd like to understand more about this topic and how we can help, and if you'd like to run a Shadow IT assessment for yourself to get started on this journey, then please contact us on the contact details that are on the screen right now, or you can contact your Fujitsu account manager. Thank you very much for listening.